Group 6, and we are doing Wachovia fraud about Scott Welch. I'm Lindsay, this is Kara, that's Johnny, and that's Aaron.
Scott Welch was Vice President in Utility Services at the Wachovia Distribution Center in Charlotte, North Carolina from 2000 to 2008. During this time, he oversaw the payments to outside vendors. He persuaded people to submit phony invoices totaling around $11 million. He also managed to evade $6.1 million in taxes by filing false income tax reports to the IRS. In 2000, Odo was remodeling Welch's house, and he approached him and told him to bill Wachovia for all of the remodeling fees. During the first year, Odo submitted over $600,000 in false invoices to Wachovia. During the 7-year period, he billed Wachovia for at least $2.6 million worth of remodeling and additions done for Welch and Welch's relatives' houses. From 2001 to 2008, Kusar billed Wachovia $5.9 million for moving services that were never performed and gave half the money as a kickback to Welch. And he also managed to evade taxes by never filing an income tax return for the money that he received doing this. In 2002, Welch approached Little, who owned a forklift company. He persuaded Little to start buying lawnmowers, golf carts, TVs, jet skis, gas grills, and jewelry, and had them all delivered to Welch's home. The bills went to Wachovia for forklift rentals. Little's lawyer said Little believed the purchases were for Wachovia and that he was doing nothing wrong. He viewed the offer as a business opportunity. Little billed Wachovia $1.5 million in purchases that were for Welch. In 2005, Welch had Dove start billing Wachovia for landscaping work that was performed at his house. They got extra money by also billing the bank for delivery services that were never provided.
The fraud triangle comes into play in the year 2000 when Welch's addiction for landscaping and luxurious items pressures him into coming up with his fraudulent scheme. Not only does his addiction drive him to commit such a horrible crime, but so does his high-ranking position within the company. Due to weak internal controls, Welch knew he had leverage over the company's invoices and seized the opportunity to get away with some easy money. Another reason Welch decided to commit the fraud was because of his sick children at home. He needed a way to help pay the medical bills that were piling up. Concealing the fraud was not a problem for Welch. For 8 years, he continuously created fake invoices with no suspicion whatsoever. This was possible because he was highly positioned within the company, which gave him an edge over weak internal controls and made everyone believe he was already wealthy. So when he began buying so many items, no one really took notice to it. They thought he was spending his own hard-earned money. However, he had a little help along the way in creating these fake invoices. The people that were helping him had their own businesses and had no criminal background, so once again, there was no suspicion brought upon him.
The fraud was detected when Wells Fargo bought Wachovia, and this is when they laid off Scott Welch and why they got a coworker to come in and to review his expenses. As he reviewed Scott Welch's expenses, they discovered that he had been billing personal items to Wachovia through his friends. After they discovered that, they got the United States Postal Service and the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation to come in and further investigate. After they came in to investigate, they discovered other people other than Welch had been committing the fraud as well. They had been performing services for Welch, but personally for Welch, but billing Wachovia. And some red flags that helped them detect the fraud were him and Kusar, one of the fraudulers, were living extravagant lives more than they were before they had started committing the fraud. They were spending a lot more money than normal. Welch was spending $77,000 on a playhouse for his children, and also he tiled his dog cage outside, which was unnecessary and you normally wouldn't do if you weren't committing a fraud.
Obviously, Wachovia have weak internal controls. One should be the culture of the company, from top management, from CEOs to top positions like vice president to Scott Welch, all the way down to entry-level accountants. They should implement on how parking activities would not be accepted within the company or organization. On top of that, they should have double check. I know that Scott Welch is the vice president of a desiring position, a trustworthy position. However, as you can clearly hear in the presentation, all men cannot be trusted. They should have had an internal or external auditor, somebody, one of Scott Welch's higher ups, double checking his word to see that everything was okay and everything was legit. Lastly, they should have a segregation of duties. One man should not be taking care of everything of one separate role. They should have split it so that one person can authorize to see if the invoices were indeed legit or real or actually taking place. Another person to record it to keep track of the record. Another person to sign off, which is probably Scott Welch. With one person doing it, he can, as you can clearly see, he easily hid the fraud that was going on for many years. He lost a lot of money.
It's really important for each employee to understand how much of an impact fraud has on a company. And this is a video to show each person about how important it is and the impact of it. And before each employee is hired, they should really be trained on the impact of fraud and what not to do and what to do in a company.
There are several ways a person can be charged with fraud. It can be under state law, it can be under federal law, there can be civil fraud, there can be criminal fraud, and so there's different elements to each kind of fraud. A fraudster can be charged with a number of things that all fall under the general heading fraud. You can have embezzlement, conversion, theft. These are all ways that you're obtaining another person's property knowingly and keeping them for your own benefit with the intent to deprive the other person of that property. So all these things with different names still fall under the category of fraud.
The problem with fraud statutes and misrepresentation statutes, especially the fraud statutes, is that there are so many state and federal fraud crimes. And you would be amazed at how many there are. I mean, bankruptcy fraud, credit card fraud, bank fraud, insurance fraud, to just general fraud statutes. And you can stumble over these fraud statutes and not even know that you may be stumbling over them. So you have to be very careful in what you're doing, how you're doing it, and to approach each case separately and make sure that you've covered all your bases, what the legal basis of any claim may or may not be.
Fraud in a civil case needs to be shown through clear and convincing evidence. But if you're in a criminal context, it has to be shown beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a very high standard. Each state has their own fraud laws, and some states may have federal. Some states may have a general fraud statute, and then several things will fall underneath it, like a conversion, embezzlement, any type of fraud, false pretenses, fraudulent inducement. Those can all fall under a broad fraud charge in the criminal context. In states, there's civil fraud as well, so there's going to be common law fraud in civil in states. Now, on the criminal level, you're also going to have all different types of fraud. There are going to be bank frauds, there's going to be securities frauds, telemarketing fraud, credit card fraud, and there's also different ways the government may prosecute this. They can use a federal RICO Act in order to do that, and then they also have other general fraud statutes.
Recordings is a big deal. In a lot of states, you have to have two-party consent, and I think a lot of our clients don't understand that in a state like Florida, you can't go around recording any conversation that you want to because you need to have all parties consent. So if a client were to bring us a recording, we wouldn't necessarily be able to use that in pursuing the fraud investigation.
A lot of people may ask, is attempted fraud a crime? And while not necessarily charged as attempted fraud, what you can do is pursue a claim of conspiracy, where two people get together to plan a fraud, where there's been an overt act in furtherance of that fraud. And then someone can also be charged with aiding and abetting a fraud. In a criminal fraud, there is no need to show that there were damages or injury. But in a civil context, pursuing a fraud requires a showing of damages or injury. When a person is deciding whether to pursue a fraud, they need to look at the materiality of what caused the fraud, whether it be an omission or a false statement. So really what you're looking for is a connection between this false statement or this act that was fraudulent and the damage that was done at the end. In several criminal statutes, there is a requirement of materiality. For example, in securities fraud, you would need to show that there's a material effect on the stock price or on someone's damages.